Welcome. Nice to see everybody on I guess at least even the East Coast people have some natural light tonight because it is close to the solstice. We are going to start in a couple minutes. For our regulars, I am not Hugh Weber. My name is Blake Eskin. I produce podcasts for Design Observer. I've been working with Design Observer for 5 or 6 years now. It's a pleasure to see all of you, and I will just kind of lay things out for you in a couple minutes. You will notice that you have been muted, we're going to we usually at the very end will unmute people just to give some appreciation, but I am going to be, feel free to use the chat to drop questions in. I will be collecting questions and sometimes sort of combining or curating questions for our guests and our co-hosts. And feel free to, and sometimes that's like, I wouldn't say the best because our guests are really great, but that's like sometimes just a really nice added dimension of the conversation. And so encourage everybody to participate that way. And as you will notice in the chat, you can see the view of Brooklyn behind me. I'm in Brooklyn, New York. Although I guess, if you recognize this, I'd be at Mass MoCA in North Adams, where I borrowed this from. Tell people who want to say where you're here from. We've got Oregon, we've got Maine, neither of them Portland's, I think. But anyway, and if you are here and you're able to turn on your video and it isn't having a sort of an impact on your on the sort of your reception, throughput, whatever, please keep your video on. It's nice to have that sense of presence in this world where I guess being in the same room as other people has become an unusual treat. I'm really happy to welcome you all. A few words about Design Observer. So Design Observer was founded in 2003 by Jessica Helfand, Michael Beirut, Rick Toyner, and the late William Drantel as a collaborative platform for independent thinking and provocative conversation about design and the larger world, bringing that conversation to an audience including, but not limited to, designers. And I was an avid reader from the beginning. Design Observer's commitment has always been to provoke and sustain and elevate conversations about design. It's been everything from traditional publishing ventures to alternative media projects, podcasts, live events, and all of these enterprises are rooted in the original mission of engaging a broader community by sharing ideas on ways that design shapes and is shaped by our lives. Throughout it all, Design Observer has maintained a diverse global perspective while striving to cultivate local and personal and meaningful engagement with our audiences. The next step in our work is the Design Observer Cooperative, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and many of you, some of you may already be a part of. Good to see you again, if so. I am, with all of that, I am going to hand things off to Jessica Helfand, who I have mentioned already, co-founder of Design Observer. And I look forward to hearing a great conversation and following a good conversation in the chat.
Thank you, Blake. I've been reading Design Observer from the beginning too. It was incumbent upon me to read everything. And it's true what you say about the breadth of this community. And tonight, I think it's a perfect example of a sort of successful entrepreneurial investigative inquiry into a host of things through the lens of design, but not only the lens of design. And so a very inclusive, proactive and generative series of people and projects we're going to discuss tonight. I want to mention one thing before I introduce my wonderful co-host, who is a new discovery of mine, but now she's going to be stuck with me forever, because wait until you hear from my co-host, Sarah Churng. She's got a lot to say, and she's going to frame a little bit of this evening for us. But before she does, and before I introduce her, I was reading this week an essay from 1958 by someone called Herbert Spencer on the subject of tradition and design. And why would I read this? I have no idea why I was reading this, but occasionally these things come across my radar. And he wrote in incredible, canonical, simplified language about why information needed to be clear, but not because it needed to be simplified or needed to be dumbed down, but because of the cognitive means at our disposal that is in fact limited by virtue of the fact that we only have the brain cells we have to process what we have. And this to me was a comparatively radical, primitive, early example of somebody talking about information design, which largely is what we're going to be talking about in many different ways tonight. And I just want to quote him for a second. This is 1958, so what is that, 62 years ago. He talked about the fact that in the Western world, now bear in mind, it's a limited example he's giving in the Western world. He said, we have today the ability and the means to produce and distribute far more words and pictures than we can collectively absorb. And it is a facility we are fully exploiting. Only a fraction of everything printed is read, and only a small part of what is read is absorbed and remembered or acted upon. So I want to begin with this idea that information comes to us all the time, fast and furious, complicated, tricky, hard to parse, difficult to define. And it is because of the complexity of the way our brains and our minds and our experience, our life experience and our bias works, that we need people like the people you're going to hear from tonight to talk about what it is they do in the service of humanity, in the service of science, in the service of community. All of our speakers tonight think about this all the time and are far more eloquent than I am on the subject. I'd like to turn it over to my wonderful co-host, Sarah Churng, who will explain to you what brought her to the field of data, design, cartography, cognitive science, and tell us a little bit about her experience with Hilary Mushkin and Scott Davidoff, who she'll be introducing. Sarah, over to you. Great.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm really glad to be here and plugged into all of this. And thank you for the invitation. I like to lead by way of introducing myself around data visualization by just kind of talking about how I've learned what it means to me on a personal level. So I like to say that as a vehicle for truth-telling, it's especially close to my heart because I'm a child of immigrants who were war refugees. And I grew up hearing stories of diaspora and of, you know, the survival of my ancestors through genocides. And the kind of continuity thread take home that I noticed in a lot of these stories was that it was the artists and the intellectuals, it was the poets who they went after first. So I heard over and over again how it wasn't the government, it wasn't the military, it wasn't the doctors or the scientists who were targeted first. It was because the people who were behind these mass oppressive regimes understood that this one thing, that while it is the scientists and engineers who cultivate and advance knowledge, it's the artists and the poets and the scholars who create the visual and the verbal representations that shape authoritative knowledge. They're the ones who know how to extrapolate meaning and then plant the seeds of information and insemination and dissent. And I like to lead that tonight with that because I think it might offer kind of a story art template for how we can talk about the avenues of data visualization, because we have quite an eclectic expertise representing data viz. We have expertise within the sciences at NASA JPL. We have data viz expertise as informed by the arts, and we have data viz as a tool for community and activism. And one of the main tenets that really, you know, drew me to data viz was this tenet that the greatest challenge of data visualization is not the representation of facts, but the recreation of experience. And so when we realize that, it really takes a kind of cultivation of the arts, of our social awareness, of our understanding of science, to bring it all together and cultivate the message. So as Jessica said, I started out in sciences. I was a cognitive scientist. I started out in computer science and linguistics. And so when I shifted to design, it was very informed through the lens of cognitive systems engineering. And so when I first came to work with Hillary and Scott, who I will have the pleasure of introducing soon, it was on the heels of a lot of research that I was doing around designing for direct affordances, around direct interaction. At the time, I was involved in research towards creating designs that engage our sensory motor reflexes rather than putting a burden on the cognitive levels of engaging with the world. So because there's so much in design that really demands so much of our cognitive attention, that when you put it all together, it creates a risk of cognitive overload. So I was really interested in being able to tell stories and create interactions that lessened that cognitive burden, and instead engaged more of our mirror neurons at the proprioceptive levels. And that also informed a lot of my work at SpaceX, because the challenge there was, how do we create affordances for the first touch screens to go into outer orbit that can be so intuitive, that can be so digestible, that these humans who are being hurled into outer orbit at speeds of Mach 2 still won't suffer from cognitive overload when they're having to navigate very complex data. And then in the ensuing years, I've really opened up to that point around engaging the mirror neurons, not just to reduce cognitive load, but to expand upon the emotional and empathetic resonance behind the experience of these interactive visualizations. And essentially, this is not new. I'm trying to do with data viz what artists and musicians and poets have been doing for a long time, and that is to make their audience a captive of the visceral qualities of a sensation and an experience, and then to introduce them into the complexities of the knowledge and the frameworks, especially around new frameworks, around new cultural reimaginings, around very complex models of thought. And especially in this moment where we have an opportunity for so much to be precipitous right now. Designers have that opportunity to enact change, to disrupt the current models, to create new mental models for these new frameworks around new social structures. That's a moment of cultural reimagining and transformative justice to look at how it can be and how it can work. So data viz can be hugely instrumental in aiding change because it offers all these tools for creating new mental models, right? So that very much speaks to my personal tribute to the artists and poets in history who have dedicated their lives to speaking up for these marginalized truths. And Hillary, I'm sure, will be able to speak more to that. But by way of introduction, knowing that about me, I think you'll see how it was really fate that delivered me to be able to work with Hillary and Scott. It was very pivotal for me to have been able to intern with them in this program that they'll talk more about, the Data to Discovery initiative at Caltech. So I'll start with Scott Davidoff. Scott Davidoff is, there he is well, both Scott and Hillary are half of a team of 4 that include Maggie Hendry from Art Center College of Design and Santiago Lombeda at Caltech. And they have co-founded and they co-direct this really unique program called Data to Discovery, where every summer they work with designers and software engineers and artists to create for the scientists and engineers at Caltech and JPL data visualization softwares towards the research and advancement of work at NASA and at Caltech. So Scott is the manager of one lab at JPL, the Human Interfaces Group at NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. And there he leads the design and development of human interfaces for mission operations. That includes UIs used by NASA scientists and engineers for Mars rovers. And his investigations also explore how data visualization and virtual reality can impact space exploration and telerobotics. Scott has authored over 20 research papers, including Best Award papers at the 2012 ACM Conference on Designing Interactive Systems and the 2008 Design and Emotion Society Conference. And some of you may recognize him from the video lectures from 2013 at the Caltech Symposium for Emerging Science of Big Data Visualization. And then alongside Scott, we have Hilary Mushkin. She is a visual artist and a research professor of art and design at the California Institute of Technology. I'll just let that sit for a second. She's a professor of art and design at Caltech. In 2011, she started a project called Incendiary Traces, which is an art, research, and media initiative to reverse engineer the politics of landscape visualization. Her independent artwork has been exhibited at the Getty Museum in LA, the Freud Museum in London, and the Museum Ludwig in Cologne. And along with Scott, she, as I said, is one of the co-founders of that initiative that ties together Caltech, the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, and Art Center College of Design. Her voice is guided and informed by artists and thinkers such as Susan Sontag, A.L. Weisman, and Laura Kurgan in her search to reconcile the image with the experience. I think I mentioned that because that lends heavily to what we're talking about tonight. And I've also had the pleasure of keeping and continuing conversations with Hilary more recently, and she's challenged me especially to examine how we interpret subjective versus objective truths as she speaks more to what data viz can learn from intersectional feminist theory. And Hilary, you've shed a lot of light for me in this arena around especially the challenge of letting go of this kind of ingrained idea that we have to align ourselves with objective truth. Because when we stick to that kind of a premise, we risk subjective interpretations of data that can and have been used by authorities to make claims about what truths become public truths. So that has been especially part of my evolution around data viz. So I think, it would be great to have Scott and Hilary just, if you'd like to do more to introduce yourselves, but I'd really like to hear, how the Data to Discovery initiative happened for you, how it coalesced, how it codified, how it's evolved both to inform your own work and how your work has come to evolve in informing the initiative. I think we can start with Scott.
Thanks. It's a nice question to ask. I think we had a really nice, just the coincidence of timing of different life changes. So Hilary and Maggie and I actually all started jobs in the Pasadena area at the same time. And so, we got to talking about whether, and we had this shared interest in visualization as a kind of mode of inquiry, and had a shared series of methods that we really found in common both across art and design. And we just started to wonder if we could create a program that would allow us to merge those disciplines and to see if we couldn't use those as a way to actually make scientific discoveries in the world. And of course, we were right in the middle of these amazingly dense, rich communities full of people both asking profound questions about where life came from, or how cells express genetics, or whether life could exist on other planets. And we thought, this crazy idea, hey, this might just work, but who knows? Let's experiment. And we thought, let's see if we can't bring these ideas together. And so we kind of came up with this idea around a program, and we've just kind of been running with it ever since. And it seems to be working. It's still, there are days when it feels still pretty amazing to me. And it does feel like a delight to be getting to do work in these contexts. But anyway, I think that was kind of a good introduction to how we all got started and started to think about things.
Hillary, you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just add to that I have to say I still remember the first meeting we had. I don't know where we were. I think we were at JPL in some I don't know, conference room. But anyway, so yeah, I think that's all. I agree with all of that, and I just want to say that we started this. Maybe I'll just describe. I mean, I don't know. Would it be helpful to describe how the program, like how our team is structured? Okay, so I think that to some extent we actually came up with this structure because of limited funding, and kind of trying to figure out like how to do the most with what we had available, and probably also with our own, resources and our own, we had other jobs, right? So this was sort of part of what we were doing. And so we came up with this structure, which we're still using today, although this year we have a slight modification to it. But the structure was that we would work with 3 research groups at Caltech and JPL on 3 different projects that are related to data visualization problems that they have, and that essentially we would, and then we hired 5, and we still do this. We've been doing this is our 8th year. We hire 5 every year until this year. We've hired 5 interns. This year we have 6, but every year in the past we've had 5 interns. 3 of those are computer science interns and 2 are design interns. And this year we have another intern who's sort of operating in a multifaceted capacity as a artist / media artist / theorist of sorts. But anyway, so the sort of fundamental structure is that 3 computer science students work on each of the 3 projects. They sort of own the code for that. And then the 2 designers work on all 3 projects collaboratively. And they really all do work together. But this is the reason that we sort of assign the CS interns to the CS, meaning computer science students, to each of the projects separately, is so that there's no kind of confusion about at the end of the day, like who needs to get the code, who needs to, hand it off to so-and-so and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's roughly how the sort of team is structured. And so we did this the first year we did it, Sarah was one of our interns. Yep. I'm just realizing that. And then, and Santiago Lambeda, who is our 4th partner in organizing this program, we brought him in for guest critic, sessions with us during that first year. And then the second year, and from then on out, we asked him to please help us and be part of our team. And he's been basically, I was about to say without Santiago, we wouldn't be operating, but I think that really without all 4 of us, any one of us, each of us has really, really unique contributions to the program and the projects that we do. And when I think about it, it's really, it's kind of astonishing how interdisciplinary our collaboration is, and how we've really drawn upon these sort of unique knowledge bases, but also unique sort of strengths in terms of, things that we can do, the positions that we're in where we can draw upon, resources that are unique from our different institutions, all kinds of stuff. So And then when our interns come, they also bring their unique perspectives, and it's really exciting when we finally, we sort of set up our projects in advance with the research groups. We spend most of the year, September till June, sort of organizing that, and then the interns come and we get to work.
So
yeah, in fact,
oh, please continue.
I was just going to build on what Hillary was saying. I think one of the things that's been so interesting is we kind of treated this like a kind of technical program, and so we basically, announce a call to scientists, which I'm sure comes across on our first year as totally bananas. And we're like, hey, we're going to use design and visualization to help you solve some of your hardest problems. And then, people are curious and respond. We get about at least, I think, 30 proposals on an average year. And we really get to meet a lot of scientists and engineers working on these really interesting problems. And we kind of down select and find some projects that we think, as we've gone through this, meet some criteria, both in terms of really interesting areas that we all want to work in, as well as projects that we think we can make a kind of reasonable amount of progress on in a pretty intense 10-week studio format. And I think that's the other part about the program that's been really interesting. In putting the students together, we basically, really produce functioning prototypes of new ways of imagining the problem domains that each one of these projects engages with. And then I think to answer one of the questions that Jessica asked earlier, how has this gone and built on in our own individual work? I think one of the things that we've then seen is that those work, what we do together in the summer really just becomes the kind of kickoff of learning, seeing if we can then build on it. And several of those projects have had legs that have lasted many years. And so it really kind of becomes a way to incubate these ideas that become long-term partnerships, where I think one of the real products is a growing belief in the community and an infusion of designerly methods, where people, I think, now have come to see that, hey, actually, when we partner with these groups and when we actually try to use design to solve science problems, that it could actually produce results that are oftentimes very different than the results that the scientists themselves have been kind of convening around and converging on for a very long period of time. And so I think it's something that has, the summer program, which we still, run, and is kind of the core engine for starting up new collaborations, is now just kind of one piece of something that for all of us has extended over the last years. And in fact, this past year, I think 3 of the projects, 2 projects and one with a past student that we actually brought back to work on visualizations of the kind of, the planetary scale of climate change. And so we've gotten to bring on new projects, as well as just continue to work on the projects that kind of, speak to us as individual contributors the most. And so I think that's been a fun part of how the program has grown. In addition to the work that we get to do together, it's just kind of gone on throughout the year.
I'd love to hear an example of a project. Is that something that you could characterize for us? We've put a link on the site, I think in the chat window, our producers put a link to the dataviz.caltech.edu so you can see all the projects. But maybe you could give us an example of one that you think really exemplifies the sort of fruit of these labors together.
Sure. The Pixel project comes to mind for something that I've been working on. Hillary, is there one that you'd be interested in sharing?
No, that's good. Go ahead. And that's a great example. Yeah.
Okay. So for that particular project, so on the next Mars rover, which is going to be launched in less than 30 days, it's the Perseverance rover. And one of the main missions in fact, one of the entire motivations for the entire mission is to see if they can actually discover if there's evidence of life on Mars. And so there are a number of instruments that the rover will carry that are highly specialized around this area. One of them is a planetary instrument for X-ray lithochemistry. Pixel is what it's called. And one of the co-Is on the Pixel project wrote a proposal to us. And you know, it's the kind of thing, it just sounds totally crazy. Hey, can you guys see if design and visualization can help us discover life on Mars? We're like, yes, sign us up, please. It was a wonderful partnership. And at the end of, so we kind of, you know, worked together for 10 weeks. We had a wonderful group of students. And at the end of the 10 weeks, we really, I think, output this really capable analysis environment that brought a couple of different techniques from visualization into the world of astrobiology. And they really gave the scientists this kind of amazing, you know, capacity that was so exciting to see them really engaged and see their own data in a way that I don't think they had been able to access before. And so we then, you know, with the team, then wrote a proposal and got follow-on funding. And then I took with two of the students and we partnered with them for the entire next year. And we added a module to the prototype that we created to allow it to focus on basically a machine learning toolkit. And so then they brought in this high dimensional visualization to be able to see if we couldn't actually try some of the analyses and automate them. And at the end of that, so, you know, maybe it's about a year now, we kind of came to an understanding with the project that it would be wonderful if we could actually turn this into the definitive tool that they're going to use for the mission to actually do the analysis that they'll be getting from their data. And so we went out and got on the order of $1 million from the Mars 2020 project to put this tool that we had been prototyping into production. And we got at that point, the students left and went to found a spectroscopy company. It was a wonderful partnership. And one of the other students that was on that project went to join the company. But we've then been carrying this work forward, and we're getting ready to now use it to actually analyze the first data that comes down, and that'll be in February of 2021. And I think by the time we get to that point, we'll have been on the project for 4 years. So
Yeah,
I think it's,
I was just going to say, I remember from that first year how blown away our stakeholders were at the end of the 10 weeks. And not just because of the technical breadth of what was delivered, but also because I think they realized how integral the relationships that had been fostered could be evergreen, and that was both critical and impactful.
Yeah, it's, I think one of the most exciting outcomes that we really get to see is to watch a scientist who's never seen something in their data before with something that you made and or helped to make. And I think that's achievable by having design partner with data visualization. It still seems kind of amazing. And I think it's one of the things that is really the most powerful outcomes of the program and has allowed it to maintain the momentum over the time that we've been practicing. But partnerships like that have, spawned from a number of different projects. Santiago, one of the partners, has been working or had been working with a cellular genetics lab for the year after we had partnered, and I believe had, in fact, maybe even 2 years. So, I mean, that's just another example of the product that had gone through. And then another example of one that continued was something I had alluded to before. One of our students from the previous summers had reached out to us and said, I'm really concerned about climate change. Can we kind of kick off a project together? And this is something that Hillary and I worked with him to then put together a series of articles that were published on the climate.nasa.gov website that explain some of the, we kind of took on the very complicated idea of explaining what the massive, something like a gigaton means. And I think that's the kind of fun thing that we were able to do from that project and take on just such an important topic, and kind of, again, put our visualization skills into the service of some other message.
Scott, I remember in your introduction to the symposium in 2013, you had said, we, as data visualization, offers the opportunities to make the invisible visible and to make the intangible tangible. And these are very scientific fields of inquiry that the interns are collaborating with. And yet the program is so unique, and still 7 years later is so unique, in that it takes a very design, art, humanities, digital media approach rather than a more library science approach to the organization of data. Hillary, I was wondering if you could speak more to that, because it's hard to articulate, maybe to non-designers especially, why that's so impactful, why that's so critical.
It's funny because as I was talking, I was thinking, oh, that's probably my fault. I mean, not on purpose, but I can't help it. So, yeah. So I guess that maybe what I could say, and this is kind of echoes something that Scott said earlier, which is that, so I think that the way that I see this program is really not as a sort of in a practical way, because I'm come from a background in art, fine art, which is just distinct in the sort of modernist sense from design, in that it's supposed to have no use. That's how, modernism defined art, right? So, so I think that, you might ask, or I might ask myself, what's this all about? What am I doing involved in this project? And so for me, and this goes back to something Scott said earlier, when we all got together, we were wondering if we could, put the sort of skills and expertise that we had into a context where we could help researchers in science and engineering see their data in new ways, and essentially help them to recognize different things that they wouldn't have normally seen, and that could lead to new discoveries, or could actually be discoveries on their own. And the reason that was something that was a question that was interesting to me is, as an artist, is because a lot of artists who work with scientists, the work that they do in collaboration usually becomes art. And I can't really think of very many artists who make art that becomes, in collaboration with scientists, that becomes science. And so, because this was the beginning of this job that I have at Caltech, I'm sort of scratching my head thinking, what is the contribution that I have here that I can make? And so this was really a question that I wanted to know, is it possible to do that? And so I think that maybe is part of it, that why it sort of has this kind of art design bent. And then the other thing I think is that often when we look for projects that we're going to collaborate with researchers on, we think about the visual and representational aspects of it. So there is no, so we don't want to end up with projects where the majority of the work is computing, because it doesn't take advantage of the skills that we bring to that most of us, or at least half of us, will bring to the project. So I think that people come to us with things which we don't think really sort of work sometimes, because they don't have a representational or an interactive component, or, I mean, as you said, Sarah, earlier, that they don't necessarily seem to sort of be conducive to drawing out how the researchers understand using visual and interactive practices. So we look for those kinds of things, and I think that that's part of it too.
I want to change gears just a little bit here and bring Jessica Bellamy in. Such an interesting thing to contemplate this idea of design in the service of science. And as you said just now, Hillary, I love this idea of science becoming art, and art becoming science. It's something I think about, certainly keeps me up at night. But there's also this notion that I think that Jessica Bellamy is going to talk about, perhaps, which is design in the service of community. Let me just say a few things about Jessica Bellamy, who might be a really good example of what happens if you look up triple threat in the dictionary. She is trained as a research analyst. She's trained as a community organizer and as a designer. She comes from Louisville. I think she's in Louisville right now. She began her career at the University of Louisville in the Neurodevelopmental Science Lab, where she worked for nearly 5 years doing research analytics around things that I think she'll tell us about. I think it's maybe not a totally dissimilar background from Sarah's in terms of people who come to the study of design from thinking about behavior and science and cognition and language and different languages and ways of thinking about database as a visual language, which of course it is. The work that Jessica Bellamy is doing, I think, certainly takes into consideration many of the things we've been talking about in terms of the representation of data and information. But the actual physical day-to-day work, I imagine, is quite different. And so, Jessica, welcome. And could you tell us a little bit about what you're working on and how you came to this work?
Definitely. Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here and share space with everybody here on this call. Yeah, for sure. So right now, well, the country's the globe really is in the midst of an uprising. We're in the middle of pandemic, and we have so many other things going on as a result of all that. Evictions are coming. Oh my gosh, there's housing crisis, economic crisis, all things are happening. And what I do for a living as a research analyst, community organizer / information designer, really it all kind of like meshes together in our day-to-day. Earlier this year, a colleague and I founded the Root Cause Research Center because we wanted to bring our specialties and our expertise together. Prior to starting the center, I worked for myself. I had started a social enterprise called GRIDS, the Grassroots Information Design Studio, and I've had that social enterprise for nearly 6 years. That's what I was doing, working with nonprofits and community groups. I've made like over 170 different projects for different clients and groups and movements and things like that. How did I get to this work? It is a meandering path. It's a meandering path to pursue anything that involves purpose. I do feel like that. But the story that I like to tell of how I got inspired to even try to do such a niche career path, looking at infographics and how it works for community, starts in Smoketown. Smoketown is the oldest historically Black neighborhood in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's actually a neighborhood that I'm from, right? It was started just after the Civil War, and it was one of the few places African Americans were allowed to live at the time. And since then, it has gone through a lot because there hasn't really been investment. It hasn't been given the entitlements that other neighborhoods are afforded in our city. But people have been able to pull together, still build collective power, and still push forward. My family's been in for decades. They have a restaurant. They're a very big part of the community. They convene people in space, and they are so incredibly active. And about in 2013, 2014, the Obama administration released their Hope 6 initiative, which was to take the public housing units that exist across the country and tear those down to build up mixed income apartments so that there could be less concentrated poverty across the country. That was the goal program. When it hit our city, there's one specific public housing complex that exists in Smoketown called Shepherd Square. And when that was torn down, it displaced so many people, a large number of our population. Our population is still over 70% Black, but since all those folks have dissipated or been forced out rather, because they weren't given the opportunity to come back in a way that allows people to come back. We don't have to go into those details. There was a lot of interest that was grown around Smoketown. Smoketown's right next to the downtown area. some investors and developers saw this as an opportunity to expand the urban core. And for folks that have heard the term gentrification, that's what started to set in years ago. Once that displacement happened, there were tons of investors that were buying up properties, starting initiatives, trying to flip the neighborhood for folks that didn't live there, for a more affluent class, right? And so myself and a lot of other organizers in the city saw this, and what we wanted to do was we wanted to lift up the community concerns, the community voices, because there were still residents of Smoketown. There were still people that were living, doing their everyday lives, and should be a part of the conversation. People that knew what assets could use more resources, people that were very familiar of the culture and the historical context of that moment, and that wanted to be a part of the momentum moving forward. And so at the time, I was working in a very cushy research job at U of L, in the neurodevelopmental science lab, which I don't think it's exactly like your background, Sarah, because we were working specifically with folks that had genetic disorders, specifically Williams syndrome, duplication, 7q11.23, and Down syndrome, doing a lot of testing around behavioral language and all that stuff, but very specialized around those populations. But I was doing that work, and I was doing a lot of volunteering, organizing in my time. So when we decided to pull together these comments, we created a survey, right? This survey was about 55 questions long. We sat on porches, we sat in living rooms, we talked to so many people just to collect information, to see what people wanted to see, what people wanted to do, and what people wanted others to know about their neighborhood, because there were all these new arrivals, right, of folks and all this invested interest. And when we gathered all that data, we also started looking at information about like what is the walkability of the neighborhood, what are some of the issues that we can investigate and include those data also in this report, so that when we put it all together, that this is a resource that developers, policymakers, all these folks can use so that they can actually grow with the current residents. That was the goal of the project, but that's not exactly what happened. And let's see, we made this report, and when we released it, we definitely put it in the hands of those we intended to have, which was the developers and those policymakers, but we also put it in the hands of the community. Like, we did several cookouts where we gave so many out, talked to a lot of people about it, and there was a lot of attention that was focused in on Smoketown by the local media sources, because there were also some complaints, like folks in Smoketown had some words, you know, that's what I'm trying to say. And one thing that I think was really surprising for onlookers was that Smoketown was a very active, very civically engaged, like, yes, they're registered to vote, yes, they participate actively, but people don't talk to them. So we were able to organize a meeting with the council member of that time with residents to start to get through issues that were raised. And media came, all these folks were in the room. Here's this council person who is did in the space, which was every community concern you can give me, I'm going to tell you 99 reasons why it can't happen or why that's not even really an issue. And it wasn't until someone opened the, like, actually, it is an issue. You can see on page blah, blah, blah. And everyone was like, what? And they opened up the report. The whole conversation shifted, because now the community members had the data points in their hands. So there wasn't anything that the council member could say to them that could recharacterize or reshape the narrative that was absolutely true about Smoketown and where it was and where people go. And when I saw the room and how the conversation changed, I was so incredibly inspired. I felt like I'd made this weapon that people can use to battle these injustices, right? In this very specific place. It's very personal to me, because it's, again, the neighborhood I'm from. And I took a leap of faith. I saved a nest egg of my little research money, and I ended up starting Grids within like 3 months of that time period. And yeah, I did it up until January of this year when we started the Root Cause Research Center. That was back in like 2014 when we released a report, I believe, and we are here now.
So there's a question in the chat that maybe comes to this, and maybe we could open this up a little bit. Christian asked an interesting question about the role of the designer as translator, right? So we can talk about this in science, and Maggie Hendry, who's on the call, who's the representative of this wonderful team from Art Center, mentioned this to me in a conversation recently, that how these languages come about, what the sort of forms of inquiry are, how organic they are to the content. Maggie, forgive me if I'm paraphrasing this poorly, but it's interesting in light, to me, what I'm remembering from our conversation is interesting in light of what Christian's asking. And I wonder if you found, Jessica, when you were doing this work, did the forms your work took change by virtue of the on-site community-based, like, in situ research? Like would you, if you were alone in your studio, would that have been different? And I could probably ask the same question of the scientists, whether, Hillary, you're working with interns like Sarah was when she was an intern, who are actually seeing things for the first time. They're galvanizing them to think about a visual language or about a form that they might not have otherwise thought of. So do you feel like the translator, Jessica, when you're doing this work?
I feel like translator is not exactly the word that I want to use, but I love that question, and I'm going to address it the best that I can, because I do feel like when a designer stays isolated, like we do, right, at our computers, we're trained to immediately solve, like, for the problem, get a solution, knock it out, and that way of working just doesn't function. It kind of makes me think a little bit about what Sarah said earlier about the difference between objective and subjective truths, right? Data itself is not a neutral form of reality. That's not my quote. That's Martin Tisney, who published a piece back in 2018 in the MIT Tech Review. But like, it is not a neutral form of reality. Without any context, you start to skew what's actually happening there, right? And so that's how it's also so easy for implicit bias to seep in with any type of data source. So when you're thinking about telling a story where you're using information, you have to make sure that that social context is there, that cultural context is there, that historical context is there, where you're trying to get at the emotional truths and the deeper embodiments of what does authentic representation look like for this message, but also what's a mindful and sensitive portraiture where we're taking in the macro context and not just the micro context of the situation. And when I say macro context versus micro, most of the time when I talk to other designers that do data viz or just design in general, they're designing for the user and for the client. Those are important fields, but when you talk about the macro context, you need to consider the stigmas, the overarching, like, ideologies that might be behind words that you're using, jargon, terminology, the images, the way everything is so coded. Are we continuing to reflect visions of the world that we don't want to see, or are we breaking through it in a different way? There's so many people that I look to, like Tamika Lewis, who's with Our Data Bodies, who is a fervent advocate of bringing all these other contexts exist and making sure that you're working within community to lift up these works that function for the viewer, but they're all going to miss the message, you know, or try to build on just operating assumptions that we may have because of the ways that we've been, you know, subjected to information for so long about certain people, about certain places. Like, how are we breaking free from those truths through the language that already exists for the people that are trying to speak, right? So that requires a working very closely and making sure that you're being led by the people most impacted. Yeah, sorry I talked so long. I'm so long-winded.
This question also reminds me of a quote I've been coming back to recently by Grace Lee Boggs, who was an activist and critical in the founding of the Black Power movement. And a mentor to Adrienne Marie Brown. And she said, what if we focus on the critical connections rather than critical mass? In the vein of movements towards social justice reform, that means, you know, looking for what Kimberly Crenshaw talks about as the intersectional points of the marginalized people, the marginalized truths, the marginalized frames that fall through the cracks of existing models that separate them. In terms of data visualization around science, data points of intersection really point to, similarly, data points that fall through the cracks because they don't align with existing frameworks. I think this speaks a lot to what Jessica was just saying in the macro truths. You don't even get to a point of the macro truths if you're so focused on these micro levels of data points that don't get upheld in the larger platforms and the larger mental models. A quick example is, you know, if we think of how how quickly the mental model of trickle-down economics took hold, because you didn't want to be an idiot if you didn't understand, if you admitted to not understanding gravity, right? If you couldn't understand how simple and what a no-brainer trickle-down economics was, you were admitting to not understanding gravity. So if we can align, if we can create mental models that are so viscerally adaptable, that are so readily digestible, that are part of these macro truths, you get to not only make relevant these points of intersection that fall through the cracks, but really speak to the truth of how they are part of the macro truth.
Yeah, there are 5 basic points I generally point people in the direction to when I start to talk about how do you build data equity into your practice. Because if you're building equity into your practice and trying to really explore, like, how do you help this work be fully whole, right? Then you're doing 5 things. You're making sure that you're being considerate, where you're recursively evaluating your work and how you're collaborating and other folks in that space, where you're being cooperative, making sure you're acknowledging the power dynamics that exist and respecting all the skills and wisdom and the lived experience that exists in that space, making sure you're being inclusive, because half the time when we ask who's missing from the critical people that are missing from the table, about being accountable, the taking of responsibility for and how it affects the world, right? And the thing, making sure that you're being flexible, because of the foresight to do no harm, but we can have the integrity and the agility to do better. So those are usually the 5 things I point people in the direction of trying to embody when you're trying to build data equity into your work. Mm-hmm.
This question of data equity interests me greatly. And this question of, I mean, it speaks to something that comes up with my students all the time. Does the sophistication of visual language, is it exclusive? Is it elitist? Is there something about finding a way to create visual data that accelerates, elucidates, magnifies, simplifies, without keeping people in the dark or being designed for design's sake? I mean, there's so many questions we could ask about this, and I'm so intrigued by where we've come at this moment, thinking about the macro and the micro, thinking about community and your weapon. That's a beautiful word, actually, even though it's an angry word. In some ways, it's actually really effective thing to think about, a tool that actually galvanizes. And I think that's actually probably exactly the kind of thing that's going on every day in your data viz program. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what has surprised you in these 8 years, Hillary and Scott. Like, if there have been either people like Sarah who've come along and asked questions you hadn't thought of, or things you've given back to the scientists that has led to different kinds of languages kind of evolving there. Could you speak a little bit to that? Or not?
I don't actually, I was sort of thinking that I actually wanted to say something just in response to what Jessica and Sarah were talking about first, if that's okay. So I don't want to derail this, but I just was thinking, and maybe this is related, actually, I think it is to some extent an answer to your question also, which is just thinking about who is the, like, in these conversations that were in the conversation that you guys who can't see who I'm pointing to on the screen, Jessica and Sarah, that you were just talking about, I was thinking about the sort of positionality of the social position, social, political, economic, gender, racial, all these different positions that each of us embody, and what are our relationships to data, and what are the biases and expectations that other people have when they come to us as humans, as bodies, and what is the relationship to data as something that is supposedly objective, and the people who present the data. And so, Jessica, when you gave that example about, there were these community members who were presenting to, or who were, holding literally, I'm imagining like people with paper, which I don't know if anyone really does that anymore, but they're like with their laptops, or I don't know what it was, the paper, you know, the printouts, and saying, I'm holding the data, right, to somebody who's in a politically powerful position. That is a bit like, the reason you're saying that's a weapon is because it's the expectation is that the data should be held by the person who's in power, right? Not by the person who is being oppressed. And this is part of the sort of the oppressed versus the sort of the, you know, being in a position of a marginalized group versus being in a position of a dominant group, okay? So I think that going back to this question about what surprises me about our program, and this is also sort of a little bit interesting to me about our own narrative about our program, which is like, gee, could this even work in the first place? It does go back to where I think we come from and where we are, who we are. I'll speak for myself as an artist, like going into a research institution that is JPL and Caltech are sort of, their identities are sort of circumscribed by science and engineering and a shared language of math. And really, like, humanities is marginalized. Art is like something to stick on your wall. Like, it's not research, you know, it's not understood in that way. And so I think that, you know, for me, coming into these institutions, Caltech and JPL, and thinking about what happens if me and my collaborators, because I could never do it myself, but we, meaning all of Scott, you know, Maggie, Santiago, our interns, all of us sort of come together under this sort of umbrella, which is kind of a murky identity, right? What is data visualization? Who is this weird art lady? Like, oh, but there's a computer scientist. Okay, like there's a lot of things that people bring to it, right? That there is this kind of like, that we and our backgrounds do relate to the data in different ways, right? So I think that there's something about that, which I think when we say, oh my God, I can't believe these people, like, you know, are excited about our work and they want to further it. And we actually are, you know, contributing to science now, and that is recognized. And we're publishing papers in science journals, and, you know, like help, like building stuff that the scientists will then use to actually interpret data that is not speaking for itself, right? Like that is actually remarkable to us. It's remarkable to us because we're not actually the astrobiologists, and we're not the, you know, I'm not, you know, the person who's coming there with that background. And I know that there is this sort of assumption about the sort of intellectual kind of domain expertise that is more sort of broadly cultural, which is that science is like, you know, science is going to save us. And, you know, art and design are nice. Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of, I think, maybe what's exciting about, you know, and surprising to us is because of where we come from in terms of our or at least for me, my own position.
And it's really interesting to hear. Oh, were you going to say something? Go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to add to that one of the things that I also found really surprising about the environment, and I think one of the things that made science just so much more human to me, was, I think, in this cultural mythology of kind of scientists creating these mighty things. You know, I imagined people just so relentlessly pursuing inquiry that they would obviously have the most sophisticated representations of their own data and knowledge about interaction. And I think what I learned is scientists are busy professionals, like so many other busy professionals. And there are traditions in their discipline, and you're educated into this series of traditions. And those are often how the analysis is done, the mathematics that underlie a particular analysis, the software systems that are used to structure the analysis and the representations that are used to interrogate the analysis. And they really kind of converge on like good enough, right? And I'm sure what they were able to figure out at one time was, you know, an advance over the previous generation. But what I think I was surprised to find was how those, in all of these different physical sciences, right? So, I mean, like you're talking a huge range of disciplines that we've interacted with, but they seem to be really unaware of like the sophistication that a designer can bring to understanding the idea of like how to encode data. And that is a huge field that people can dedicate their entire lives to and feel like they just never get enough knowledge, right? It's just so rich. And I think I was amazed at how little scientists understood that, or how kind of separate it seemed to many of the scientists that we see. And so I think that's one of the things that makes it feel so obvious how we could offer something, because when you come with a sense of how representation works with cognition and how higher dimensional representations can get compressed into an envelope that you could understand, and how you can also then layer interaction on it to change what you're investigating. And those are things that scientists don't think about as material, right? They really don't engage in inquiry around how could the interaction be better. And so I think those are things that created this environment that I was really surprised to have found. And I think really create the opportunity that we kind of try to occupy through the work that we do. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that's one of the things that really makes it possible. And when we actually do get to a point where we can watch a scientist do some kind of discovery, it's kind of amazing. I think that's always delightful to me too.
I see there are starting to be some questions in the chat. I actually have a question for Jessica Bellamy, which is, so you're hearing Hillary and Scott talk about their interactions with scientists, and you come first from this world of medicine or science, and now into a world of, community policy. And I'm just wondering, what is different, or what you've noticed that's different about making visualizations or visualizing data for scientists or for specialists, and visualizing data for the public or for a specific community to make a specific argument.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, it's very different, because before, when I was making data visuals in the lab, like where I used to work, it had to be very rudimentary, very simple, and I felt like it kind of got lost in the mess. And like when you think about the amount of text that you see in scholarly journals and things of that nature, and now where I'm working, I also feel that it underrepresented the criticalness of that data. If we spent time to visualize it, even if it was just a pie chart or a bar graph, it kind of lost its meaning and the reason why we were trying to emphasize it in some ways. But yeah, when you're working with community, it is very different. And I think there's a lot of beautiful, powerful moments that address, like another question that was asked about the origin of data and where does that play in it. And because knowledge production is another like highly authoritarian thing, right? That only certain people have the ability to produce knowledge. And when you're working with community, you are validating their experiences and their perceptions of reality, their perceptions of the world. Not saying that they're crazily different from our own, but when you hear about mass evictions coming, or the fact that there's illegal evictions happening right now, even though folks are protected under the CARES Act, I can't tell you how many rooms I've been in with institutional partners, right, that are researchers that are working with housing data. They're saying, oh, illegal evictions are just not happening right now because they're protected under the CARES Act. Well, let's talk to people. So when you're talking about that data or trying to tell that story, you have to put it in the context of that reality to better explain to folks that don't have those understandings. And even that validation process is healing and restorative in its own way, right? Yeah.
So I see a few questions coming in. I actually like, I'm going to go back to Christian's question and throw that to Hillary and Scott. So who is playing the role of the translator, or is translator the wrong mental model for this? And then we'll take some of the others.
I think it's an interesting question. I think this is one of the roles that I think we really, it's easy for me to understand the design and art side of the discipline serving in that capacity. And not just designer, but I think designer and often through the artifact. So I think, right, the kind of, if you really understand the artifact as the boundary object here, I think one of the things that we find is most powerful is just deep listening. And then the knowledge, right? The scientists often say things that are really complicated. And I think what I think is so lovely about designers is we'll often try to then reflect back what we thought we heard. And that will involve a lot of sketching and representation. And then, of course, I think when science is often really complicated, what you hear is, well, that's kind of what I meant. And it kind of takes a lot of loops back and forth. And so I think translation is the outcome. And I'm not sure the designer themselves is just kind of like the direct conduit. I think it's actually a kind of process that translation is the outcome of. That's one way to frame it.
Observation, Scott, but until you said the thing about artifacts, you could have been talking about couples therapy.
Right.
Every therapist says, start by saying what you think you heard, right?
Yeah.
But listening is what we all are doing now, period, end of story. I mean, it's a beautiful example of a kind of care of what happens in these hybrid experiences where a scientist works with a designer or a community research person goes in to talk to people with different voices, is knowing that those voices aren't your own. And I'm wondering, Sarah, if your background in cognition, if that's something that you've known all along because you study the way different people learn and how different voices actually manifest.
I mean, well, the way that I like to think is always in frameworks, no matter how abstract the problem or how abstract the relationship. And so I remember there was a moment in one of the projects in that year that I worked with Hillary and Scott and Maggie and Santiago, where one of the projects, we just could not get, any momentum. And it was week 6 and we're freaking out because we understand, our technical person understood the technical, and there was no language barrier. And yet the story just continued to get layered in more complexities. And I really like what Jessica was saying around data equity in her practice, especially around this recursive evaluation, because that was the opportunity, that was the process that created the translation, not the other way around. I remember there was this one moment where I saw a shift in our stakeholders' body language, Beverly McCann at the aerospace department at Caltech, because she said, and just kind of an offhanded, she was so focused on the technicals, but she said kind of offhandedly, like, oh, I don't know how to speak to both these camps, the empiricists as well as the theorists. And so I stopped her and said, wait, so you're at the interface. How rare is that? And she said, we're the only ones. And that was the moment of kind of reckoning, because here was a person who didn't know how to speak to an audience because the audience didn't even know that she existed, didn't know that the possibility of that interface was existent. That was a moment, I suppose, that paved the way for translation.
There's a question in here about, I think, Aisha's question, or just about, and I was thinking about this book, Two Metaphors We Live By, or George Lakoff and his system of framing. It says, it sounds like this is a well-known concept in the field of design. So on some level, and just a little, like an expression like trickle-down economics or death tax will be tested as a frame for talking about things. So I'm wondering, like, do you talk about your work, and I guess this applies to all of you, do you talk about your work in terms of finding the right frame for something to be, is Lakoff, and then that kind of metaphor analysis, is that useful to you? Is that how you think? And any of you can take this. I'd be curious to hear both from the JPL Caltech team and from Jessica.
I was actually thinking that maybe another way to put that is to think about mental models, which we talk about a lot. And this actually goes back to what Jessica and Scott were talking about a minute ago also, which is just, and which is to sort of know that we can't make assumptions about how the people that we are collaborating with or whose data we're working with, we can't make assumptions about what we understand about it. And I guess and also we can't make assumptions about how they understand. What we're sort of learning also is that we cannot assume that they understand what we are doing either. So we each have mental models about what the others are doing. And, but I guess that to go back to sort of how we develop these, our work together with the researchers is that I think that we do try to understand through a variety of different techniques how the researchers that we're working with interact with and understand their data without us, right? And that's sort of the beginning of understanding like what the metaphors are that they are already using. What kinds of stories are they telling about the data to themselves, to the person that's sitting next to them into the lab, at the conference, whatever. Like there's these sort of different levels of publicness, I guess, of the stories that they're going to tell about the data, and they're sort of testing them out. Those stories keep on getting iterated over and over again, and we are kind of trying to understand that. And then when we create sketches and prototypes that are, well, we think that you're saying this, does it look like this? That's a way of providing a new representation and a new way of interacting, which is in a sense a different kind of metaphor. It's not exactly as like kind of, I guess, I don't know. It's not, I guess when I think about like something like trickle down economics, that's like so pithy, right? These are not like that, but there is something in them, which is a reframing. I mean, that's sort of what we do essentially,
And Jessica,
I remember.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Scott. You were going to say something?
I was going to say something, but I think Scott was also going to say something. I can wait too. It doesn't matter.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna just add onto what Hillary was saying. There's something that I teach that's from Natasha Iskander, who's like a professor or was a professor at least at NYU Wagner. I wonder what she's doing today. But she always talked about how, or she did this wonderful piece that talked about how as individuals we cannot escape political pressures, implicit bias, our own frame of perceptions, that we actually have a very rigid view of the world.
Yeah, we lost her.
You're on mute. Sorry, I've unmuted you. I'm trying to unmute you. There you go. So you just said rigid view of the world, and then come on back in.
Yeah, that we actually have like a rigid view of the world. We have to work collaboratively to break out of that. And I think what Hillary was talking to, that idea of the prototyping, right? To start a conversation, right? To start expanding and going in different directions. When you start that place, I think that's such an organic place, especially when it's at such a low fidelity spot where people feel like there's still room to like contribute in a significant manner. It gives us the opportunity to also start to think about how can we have a multi-pronged approach here, right? Where we can go in multiple directions with our message to speak to different people or to reach them in their different access points, because our perspectives are going to be limited as individuals. So breaking out of that is always a challenge, but it's also a thrill.
Scott?
The example that came to mind wasn't one from this visualization program, but maybe one from my individual work. I think we certainly work on the idea of kind of coming up with a metaphor. But the example that I was thinking of that really kind of resonated with me was, I remember in one project I was working with basically the team that handles the scheduling of the data transfer from the Mars rovers to the orbiters, and they basically send it from the surface to the back to Earth. And the rovers, there's a number of what they call overflights, where basically the satellite is passing over, and the rover team has to decide, is this the one for us? I remember they were kind of, they use a lot of technical language. And I remember after we did this period of user research, we kind of had this eureka moment where we said, oh my God, what they're really doing is kayak for satellite time. And so like the kayak, like shopping for an airplane ticket. And that was just exactly what they were doing, right? The process was, there are things that you want, and you say all the things that you want, and then you get one ticket and it's too expensive. So you relax your constraints, and then you see a couple more options, and then you pick something. But I find that kind of structured metaphor really does allow you to approach a remarkably complex problem in a way that kind of can put it in front, really create some common ground that allow you to discuss it together, and also give you like a kind of universe of solutions that you can kind of use as your starting point. So when we've been able to find those, I find those to be wonderful examples. But I don't think I always understand the problems that we engage well enough to really come up with a useful enough singular defining metaphor. I would hope that if we had infinite time, we'd get there, but it's not always possible.
All right. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one quick thing, which is that when Scott was talking, I was reminded that one of the examples that from our project is actually working a few years ago with these guys who are the ones who control where the rover on Mars goes from day to day. They're called the rover planners, path planners, also known as the rover drivers, and they asked us for a Google Maps for Mars. So it was a similar kind of,
Yeah, that's a very good example.
Great. So we are at 9:26, so we only have a couple of minutes left. There are some other good questions in here I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to. The thing I'm really wondering about is there's an interesting combination of Ross talking about how do you legitimize yourself to your partners, whether that's scientists or the community or the politicians who the community is talking to, and then this other issue of like design. Every time a different designer comes in, we really have this question of like, well, every designer is different, and so I don't even know, like, but I think we're going to unfortunately have to leave it there. That's a good, so I just want to thank everybody. This has been a Design Observer Studio session. I want to thank our great guests tonight, Jessica Bellamy, Hillary Mushkin, and Scott Davidoff. I want to thank our guest co-host, Sarah Churng, and I want to thank Jessica Helfand for her. I'm sorry, Hugh is usually the person who does this, and he is very good at, I need to unmute everybody so we can all give our applause. And so just bear with me. So I have unmuted all of you, and so if everybody could just give a little bit of appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to remute you. It was much stricter today at the 5th grade graduation. The remute went on like that. It was like 7 seconds. Anyway, I also just want to thank executive producer Betsy Vardell, managing editor Hugh Weber. I think our intern Will Suzuki is here tonight. The net proceeds from this event go to Design for America, and I believe there are some Design for America people here in the audience tonight. Please do check out the Design Observer Cooperative, which we host on Substack. So that's, I believe, at designobserver.substack.com. Is that the right, am I giving out the right? I'm sorry, I'm going to unmute you, Jessica, or you can unmute yourself.
Technology. I just want to say there are several people here tonight that are part of the Design Observer Cooperative. And this coming Tuesday night, we're going to be doing our first event like this for the cooperative. And if you enjoyed this, it might be incentive for you to join our wonderful little subscriber group, because we're going to be having Eric Rodenbeck and Nicolette Hayes from Stamen Design. They won the 2017 National Design Award for information design, and we're going to do a deep dive into their work. So more of this, and if you want more of this conversation, we encourage you to join the cooperative. And Blake, you can, yeah, there it is in the chat.
Yep.
So.
Yep, and so this is being recorded, and I neglected to mention that at the beginning, but this is being recorded. We are not planning to post it. We have excerpted clips sometimes in our podcast, The Observatory. We also, sometimes these are available to members of the cooperative when they're archived. But anyway, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us. It's dark on the East Coast. It's perhaps dinner time or happy hour on the West Coast. I saw at least one person who is here from Europe, and so get some sleep. And thank you for joining us, and very nice to see you all tonight. So thank you very much.